and welcome to a brand new Arsecast Extra, as always, with James from Gunnerblog. James, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Andrew. How you doing?
I'm all right. This is the first Arsecast Extra of the off-season.
I know.
Yeah.
I almost had a thought as I sat down of like, how do we do this again when there's not a game? I think it's mainly where we just talk quite a lot of bullshit, isn't it?
I think that's it. And some people will be saying that doesn't really differentiate it from when there are games.
True.
You know?
True. But I think some of the sort of more niche content that we've done over the years has probably been born during the interlull.
No doubt. Well, we're into another interlull, and of course, I mean, how have you been since I saw you last, which was, last weekend on the final day? We had our show the night before and we all went our separate ways, and I switched off, in a very serious way. I didn't do any podcasts last week. I just felt like I needed a little bit of time. I was doing the blog in the morning. That was fine, but I didn't podcast, and I haven't sort of spoken about Arsenal since last week, and I have to say I'm feeling pretty I feel good about my decision to just take a few days and leave it all to one side.
Yeah, I think I've been similar, really. Just had a bit of distance from it, doing some bits and bobs of work. But I mean, the lack of games, Arsenal games at any rate, sort of does that by default, doesn't it? It removes you from it a little bit. And I mean, listen, I love the football. I love the week in, week out. I love the fact that we seem to play at least twice a week for about 4 months now. But I'm enjoying some brief respite. And I think it will feel pretty brief. I think we'll all be surprised how quickly it seems like the football is upon us again.
Well, that's true, because the Euros are on and the Copa America is on, and then there'll be preseason, and before you know it, it'll be August and we'll be, ready to go again. So yes, I think the respite will be relatively brief, but I think we all needed it to an extent.
Did you watch any football over the weekend, Andrew? There's some big games on.
No, I didn't watch a single fucking thing. I thought about watching the FA Cup final.
Yeah.
And then I said to myself, I don't want to see Man City win it. And I said to myself, I don't want to see Manchester United win it. So it felt like a lose-lose scenario for me. One I was not prepared to countenance. I just felt like there was nothing in it for me, not a thing. So I didn't watch it at all. I walked into town and had some very nice noodles. That's what I did.
That's certainly one way to do it.
Mm-hmm.
No one's going to argue with you on that.
No. Did you watch?
I watched and I had no noodles. Very much the other end of the spectrum.
I feel like the real winner here, the real FA Cup winner, was not Erik ten Hag. It was not Manchester United. It was me. Me with my delicious, spicy, beefy noodles that I got.
Well, this is how I sort of reasoned it, Andrew. I think you make a good point. But the way I saw it, United was such a mess going into it. And I think it was the night before, right, that The Guardian broke a story saying Erik ten Hag will be sacked regardless. So I thought, United are in such a mess. Either they're going to get absolutely tonked, which, would be quite entertaining in its own right. Or if they beat Man City, it's a kind of curiously big upset. So I tried to find the positives in it, and I was actually pretty satisfied with the outcome. I don't like to see Manchester United lifting a trophy, but I've had quite enough of City doing that. I think.
Sure.
And I don't know what it means about English football, what it's come to, that Manchester United beating Manchester City now feels like the Ewoks taking down the Death Star. Do you know what I mean? Like, it feels like that big an upset. Probably the biggest club in the country winning a trophy.
Yeah.
But it was interesting nonetheless. And Erik ten Hag, listen, I hope they have a change of heart. I hope they keep him in there.
I'm not sure they will. I think I would have. I don't even know what happened in the game. Like, I've got literally no clue how it happened, how it came to pass that Manchester United beat Manchester City. But my other sort of fear was that I would look at Man City if they lost this game and go and just think, you couldn't have done that fucking once in the last 6 or 7 weeks, you fuckers.
I did see a lot of people talking about that.
Right.
And United, to their credit, they did have a bit of a plan to hurt City, to get in behind them on the break. And it does feel like all too often when teams play against City, they don't even really have that kind of aspiration. They just sort of sit in and hope Haaland has an off day, basically.
Did he?
But yeah, he did. Well, yeah, he didn't score, did he? And it was a bit of a counterattack. They gifted them the first goal, so it was a kind of mix-up between the goalkeeper and Guardiola.
Oh, for fuck's sake. Guardiola, who couldn't stop fucking scoring for like a month.
Yeah, I think the keeper, what's his name? The sub-goalie. Ortega, of course. He came very far out of goal, and Guardiola kind of headed the ball over him.
Oh, jeez.
And Garnacho, onside this time, ran through to score. And then they did score a really good kind of counter-attack second goal for Mainu. And City, they applied some pressure. They hit the woodwork. Haaland hit the bar. They got a goal in the end where Onana sort of fumbled it in to the near post, his sort of customary...
his trademark save.
His trademark, yeah. I mean, the funny thing is, he was actually having a very good game, but you're never safe from Andre Onana. Even when he's having a good game, he can just throw one into his near post. But United clung on and then celebrated into the night with YouTube influencer Speed. Are you aware of Speed?
No, I assumed when you said YouTube influencer, you were going to say Mark Goldbridge, and I just had this vision of Mark Goldbridge dancing around with all the Manchester United players.
I don't know. He might have been there. He might have been Hoyland's +1. They seem to get along. But no, Speed is this guy. I mean, I don't even. I'm too old to really know who Speed is. No relation of Gary Speed.
I feel like you should. If you're only going to be known by one name, I feel like you really have to fucking earn that. Like Madonna or Prince or Bowie or Maradona or something like that. They've earned their one name status. I'm no disrespect to this Speed guy, but maybe he's taking liberties. I don't know.
So he's 19 apparently. Wow. He's a very young man. And he, I think, began as sort of streaming video games. I think I was getting Twitch mixed up with streaming. I don't know.
He was tweaming on Switch.
Yeah, I've never sounded more old in my life. I believe he was tweaming on his Stitch.
Yes. Do you know all about this tweaming things the kids are doing?
Yeah, and all the younger listeners will be nodding along to this and be like, James knows his stuff. Anyway, he infiltrated the Manchester United party, I believe, and photos have been sort of coming out of it. So in the style of the kebab meat man, from
Sprinkly Salt Meat Wanker.
Sprinkly Salt Meat Wanker, exactly. He's very much of that school.
Oh, like at the FA Cup final, yeah. Or the World Cup final,
yeah.
Sorry,
it was the kind of even lower rent version of that.
Do you remember the guy who used to get himself in team photos? I think he did it with Manchester United. A couple of times.
Yeah.
There's this famous picture. He's sort of like on the end of the Manchester United team as they're about to play a Champions League game. I think you can see Roy Keane looking over going, "Who the fuck are you? And I'm going to kill you."
Yeah.
Yeah.
To be fair, that might have been at one of his teammates. With Roy Keane, you can never be sure. But yeah, anyway, so Speed was kind of the story of the weekend.
Right.
And then I watched a bit of the playoff final to see Southampton return to the Premier League at the expense of Leeds United, which I know Andrew Allen greatly enjoyed.
He did. He wrote a very good blog on that today. Worth checking out if you haven't had a chance to read it. Yeah, if you hate Leeds and if you haven't had a chance to read it, I do recommend it. Did you have any preference in that regard?
Do you know what? I always think about it as, well, what away trip either would be like better or would I not fancy particularly? I mean, we haven't got great recent memories of St Mary's as far as
that's it. You see, I was looking. I don't like Leeds either. From my time living in England and having to deal with a lot of Leeds fans when I was in school there. But there's also we do tend to take a lot of points off Leeds, and we have had some troubles with Southampton down the years. So it wasn't necessarily that I wanted Leeds to win. I genuinely didn't give a fuck one way or the other, but. From the 6 points perspective, maybe it would have been better for us if Leeds had come up. But maybe we also owe Southampton a good kicking home and away next season.
That is true. So, yeah, I was fine with Southampton. I still bear some grievances over Jim Floyd Hasselbank at the far post and all that.
Yes.
So, yeah, I was happy enough to see Southampton come up. And other than that, I've just been sort of watching the sort of managerial scramble that is taking place in the Premier League.
It's mad, isn't it? Does it not seem like... I don't know if we've ever really seen anything quite like this before, where during the season there were very few managerial departures. Fewer managers got sacked, I think. It felt like it anyway. There was only a couple of changes in mid-season, which is not really normal in the Premier League. But come the end of the season, Pochettino's gone. Ten Hag we think he's gone, but maybe he's not gone, but he probably is, but he won the cup, so maybe he isn't, but, in all likelihood he is. Who else is looking around?
Brighton,
of course, with De Zerbi.
But yeah, it's...
Like all of them are being linked.
The same people. Basically.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say all of them are being linked with all of the jobs. It's like Kieran McKenna, the Ipswich manager, is being linked with Chelsea, and then Man United, and then Brighton, well. And they're all going for the same jobs. And
we're watching as well. I think this interesting. It's clear that and personally, I think Mikel Arteta's probably a big reason for this. But it's clear the sort of young coach is in vogue, right? They all want the next big thing.
Sure.
And also probably someone they imagine they can control and they can put into a structure.
I thought that was very interesting about Chelsea, about how they want a young manager who's got his own ideas and his principles and his style of play, but will also do whatever the fucking lunatic owners tell him to do when it comes to whatever the fuck they know about football.
What did you think about them sacking Pochettino?
I mean, it just is very Chelsea, isn't it? In that the whole place is a fucking mess for a long time. And then they bring in a guy who at least, has got experience. It took him a while to get things going. He got them into 6th place. He got them into Europe next season, albeit things didn't quite work out the way they were thinking. But he got them into 6th position. Yeah. We can talk about, obviously, the ramifications of United winning the FA Cup in a second. But it did look like he was beginning to get some measure of consistency out of the team and the players and performances as well. And then they sack him, or he's gone by mutual consent, whatever way you want to take that. Is that like, you're fired? Okay. Is that mutual consent?
I think so, yeah.
Like, what if they say, you're fired? Then you're properly fired? You can't do... yeah, you're properly fired. But if you just go, yeah, whatever, okay.
I think if they say, you're fired, and you go, no, I'm not, then they go, yeah, you are, and that's fired. But if they go, you're fired, and you say, okay, then it's mutual consent.
That's it. I mean, what do you think?
It's Chelsea, isn't it? I think I asked my brother, obviously being a Chelsea fan, what he thought. And he was like, I'm just sort of numb to it at this point. They have these managers, they sack them. There's no point getting attached to anybody. There's no sense of continuity. I think even Chelsea supporters are pretty exasperated at this point in time. I do have to say, though, the Pochettino reign did one thing, and it gave us one of the most glorious bits of content of all time. That guy, that Chelsea influencer guy. Oh yeah, Rory, whatever his fucking name is, but he starts this video. I love Maurizio Pochettino. I adore the man.
I adore him. And then like within 3 months, he's like, I hate this Tottenham prick. It's just so funny. It's about a 2-minute video. If you can find it online, I'm sure it's out there.
Well, also, they gave us as well, during the Pochettino reign, that 5-0 win at the Emirates Stadium, which I will remember fondly for a very long time.
Thank you very much indeed. So the ramifications of Manchester United winning the FA Cup are twofold. Well, from our perspective, it means we're not going to be in the Community Shield in August. Are you happy about that, or would you prefer to be part of it, or are you just kind of content to let two Manchester clubs do whatever they want to each other at the start of the season, and we can sort of maybe ease ourselves into the season with a game that isn't quite as loaded as a fixture against Manchester City?
Yes, SoCal Ben on Discord asked about this. Is the absence of Community Shield a benefit or a loss? I mean, we won it last year, didn't we? And who knows how much that benefited us. I think it did. I think it gave us a little bit of a boost heading into our league game against City, which wasn't too far away. I think it was a useful exercise and a useful sort of warm-up for that. But this year, I think it might be a bit of a different occasion, especially with players likely to come back later from the Euros. I don't know what sort of team we might have at that particular point in time. So I'm not going to mourn its loss. I think this might be a season where we have to start a little bit more slowly, or certainly maybe not quite hit our stride until we get players back a few weeks into the season. So I think the absence of a big game against Man City in that kind of slightly precarious period at the outset might be a good thing. What do you think?
Yeah, that's kind of where I am with it. I do think you're right that what that Community Shield game last season showed us was that Mikel Arteta was not prepared to expose his team against Manchester City in the way that they had been in the past. The first half was sort of absurd in a way because it was all Manchester City having the ball, and we just sat there and let them have the ball. And our shape and discipline was such, it was a precursor, wasn't it, for the way that we played and how defensively good we were going to be for last season. But I'm with you. I think we can do without a game against Man City so close to the start of the new season. And I think we can take from this season the confidence that we can go and we can really compete with them. But I prefer not. We can just have a regular friendly, or maybe it's the Emirates Cup. I'm not quite sure what's going to happen because of how weird this summer is. But when is the start date, actually? When the Premier League 2024-25 start. So what date is Saturday the 17th of August is the first weekend of the Premier League. So it is maybe a couple of weeks after the tournament's end, and we'll start getting some people back. And I think I'm happy enough to go without.
I'm with you there.
The other thing about the Manchester United win means that Chelsea, who'd finished sixth and thought they were going to be in the Europa League, are now down to, well, not down to seventh, but they are pushed down one of the European places because United get that Europa League place for winning the FA Cup, and they now have to enter the Europa Conference League. And there were some stories doing the rounds that they could be in some significant financial difficulty by entering that competition because of the PSR rules and the way that they've spent and some of the rules. I don't know whether this is true or not, but the idea of Chelsea, having to play in the Europa Conference League and ending up on the wrong side of UEFA's financial fair play rules because of that is objectively hilarious. And there was a suggestion they might not play or they might decline the invitation. I think they should be absolutely forced to play in that competition. There should be no opting out. I mean, this is what it is. You're either in or you're not in. You can't choose whether you want to be in or not. You're in. You committed to this at the start. You ended up where you ended up, and this is the consequence of United winning the cup. So you've got to play the Europa Conference League, and if that means tens of millions in fines throughout the season, well, that's just tough shit, and it serves you right for selling 2 hotels to yourself to try and get around the rules.
And if it means the club has to be liquidated, so be it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. They've got until June the 3rd, apparently, to notify UEFA as to whether they intend to take up their place in the Conference League.
Can they be fined for not doing that?
No, I've had a look at the regulations, actually, and I can't find anything to suggest there would be sanctions if they opt out.
It should be mandatory. I mean, why, can you choose, let's say if you finish fourth, can you choose not to play in the Champions League? Like, nobody would. Nobody would, obviously, for the reasons we all understand. But if you wanted to, if you finished fourth and you said, we want no
Spurs
part
might.
of this.
Their fans didn't want to play in the Champions League this season, did they? But yeah, I don't know. It seems absurd. I think they probably will end up going ahead. I just think it would be sort of humiliating to withdraw. Although some would argue it's quite humiliating for them to be in it. So it's a toss-up, really. But the Conference League final is this week, actually, isn't it? It's on Wednesday. It's a real glamour tie. What is it?
Olympiacos, is it?
Olympiacos take on Fiorentina.
Right. I mean, my give-a-fuckometer is really just not registering at all here now.
If Olympiacos win, what happens? They automatically get drawn against us in the Champions League, something like that, I would imagine.
Yes.
As tradition dictates. We had a question, actually, about the Champions League.
Okay.
Which I might throw in, if you don't mind.
Why not? We're on the topic. It's a very, very nicely done segue into something else. Although I do have something else about the United thing, but we'll come back to it.
Okay. So Travis Gresley.
I was saying to myself, that name sounds very familiar.
Yeah.
Was I in school with him?
Maybe this is their new identity. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
A lot of people think they're still alive. Are they still alive? How old would Elvis be now?
He would be 86 or something. I don't know.
Okay. Yeah, plausible.
I'm just guessing.
He's on the Discord.
Born in 1935. So he'd be 89.
Okay. Well, thanks for listening.
Is that right?
We'll take it. And he says...
We're no good at maths, by the way.
How do you think the changes to the Champions League format will affect us next season? Now, my first question, Andrew, is do you know the changes to the Champions League format?
Yes, I sort of know the changes to the Champions League format in that it's a big league. Do you play everyone? Or do you just play... No. You're broken into... There's top seeds and bottom seeds, right? Yeah. Is that right?
Right, yeah.
I don't know. Tops and bottoms.
You sound like a UEFA spokesman. The clarity. I had to look this up and familiarise myself with it.
We have the top seeds here and the bottoms are over here.
So it's one big league. In that respect, you are correct.
Mm-hmm.
But you do not play everybody. So you no longer play 3 teams twice, but you take on 8 different sides with 4 home games and 4 away games. So determine those fixtures.
Hang on.
Yeah.
You're only playing 4 different sides.
No. You play 8.
What?
You might have Real Madrid away, but, by Leverkusen at home. So you play 8 different teams. To determine those games, the teams will be ranked in 4 seeding pots, and each team will then be drawn to play 2 opponents from each of these pots.
Right.
So we're going to face a much bigger variety of teams.
Mm-hmm.
And in theory, you'll be kept away from teams from your nation. There may be some issues where you have to play an English team. It will depend on kind of how the draw goes, I think. But the intention is to keep us apart from them. And then the top 8 teams from that league, after they've played their 8 games, it's all about number 8. The top 8 automatically qualify for the last 16. And then those who finish between 9th and 24th compete in a 2-legged knockout playoff for the chance to join them.
So you could play 10 games as opposed to 6 in order to reach the knockout stages of the Champions League.
Correct. You will play a minimum of 8 games, whereas previously it was a minimum of 6.
Yeah.
And you could play a maximum of 17 games. to win it.
Right. So the
teams that are eliminated in the league stage do not go into the Europa League. Straight to jail, do not collect £200.
When you're out, you're out.
Yeah. I think that's probably a good thing.
Yeah. That's the way knockout football should be. I never really enjoyed or liked, the idea. I think we know that there's a level of priority with each particular competition, right? Champions League, Europa League, Europa Chelsea League. But I think when you drop teams from one competition into the other, it really hammers home that this is sort of like, you're much lesser than we are.
Yeah, it doesn't really feel ethical, does it? To be like parachuting teams in from another competition.
No.
So I'm glad that's gone. In terms of how it affects us, well, it means more games.
Mm-hmm.
Which, I think, we spoke about this last season, but I do think we're going to need a wider group of players that Arteta would consider first choice. I don't mean necessarily like they might not be in his absolute best ever Champions League final 11, but we need a wider pool of players that he's happy to pick from, because we're going to have to mix it up week by week.
I think that's the very obvious thing, is that you're going to have to use your squad, or have a squad that you can use or feel like you can use much more than we have done this season, where it sort of started a bit like that, didn't it? And then as the season went on, it constricted to a much smaller group of players. And I don't think, at least during the league stage of this Champions League, we're going to be able to do that. So I think that is key. It's about finding more players that the manager is willing to put his trust in and give playing time to. I suppose in some ways it might depend on the fixtures as well. Like there could be quite a variation, could there, in terms of quality of opposition?
Yeah, you would imagine so.
So,
how do you feel about it as a fan? Like, how are you excited about that? Do you think it'll be an improvement?
Who knows? I think the desperation to squeeze ever more games into a season and into a calendar year is ultimately going to have a negative impact on the quality of football, but it might just make it a more interesting knockout competition, because you don't have that safety net of Europa League. Weird things can happen in a league format, I guess, where you might get some unusual teams through. So I don't know. I'll play it by ear. It's not as if the current format was. It was fine, wasn't it? But it went through some iterations to get there. If you remember the two group stage situation that we had in the past.
Dark times.
Yeah, that was no good. So maybe this is a better way of adding more games, but in the end it is more games. It's more demanding for the players. It's more demanding for the coaches and managers to deal with the workload. So I think it is going to be about just having a stronger squad. It doesn't necessarily mean a bigger squad than the squad we had this year, but it means that players, who are there and on the bench every week but not getting any minutes, are replaced with players who get minutes and get starts.
Yeah. I think the Champions League format, maybe the group stages have been a little bit tired in recent years, or felt a bit predictable.
Mm-hmm.
I think as a fan, one of the things that's exciting about getting to Europe is this idea of who could we play? We could play anybody, and I think this format sort of plays into that idea. You'll get great variety of trips and fixtures that you don't necessarily get in the old group stage format. But yeah, I think I'll have to kind of wait and see really on how it actually comes together. It's probably not too far away from kind of the proposed Super League format in some ways.
No, I guess it is in some ways perhaps a response to that as well.
I'm sure. UEFA's way of kind of appeasing people.
Yeah, I mean, the only teams that were still into the Super League idea were Real Madrid, which is it's so counterintuitive, isn't it? Because they keep winning the Champions League, and they're like, "Fuck this! We want a completely different league," and yet their biggest successes and their triumphs come in this competition so often. Barcelona, of course, who are just absolutely flat broke and need every penny they can get from anywhere, and then the Italian clubs, whose motivations, I'm not questioning them. I'm just saying that they're open to interpretation. That might be the way of putting it.
Yeah, Madrid could win it again.
Another fucking we won the Champions League again, but this is not what we want.
Will the head of UEFA turn up to present the trophy, or will he hide at the Emirates like Richard Masters?
The other thing I was going to mention about the Man United
go on.
FA Cup win was that Newcastle, who thought they were going to be in the Europa Chelsea League, are now not in Europe at all.
Yeah, that's true. And I've seen a couple of people saying, does that make them a decent shout for a run at European qualification in the Premier League next season?
Yeah.
That's 8, or however many games it would have been, 6 or 8 games or whatever it might be. They won't have. Will that help them? I think they obviously suffered this year, didn't they?
Yeah, they weren't ready.
Balance European football and domestic football.
They weren't ready. And that's, when they finished, was it 4th? They got that because they didn't have any European football and they were able to sort of concentrate on the league on a weekly basis. But my thinking on this is that, I feel, Arsenal is a club for the community, right? It's a club that does a lot of good around the world. And, if you're, let's say, randomly speaking, right? Let's say you, James.
Hello.
Are you there?
Oh, yes.
Okay. I'm just saying, let's say we're imagining a hypothetical here, where you are 24 years of age again. Okay. You're also Swedish, and you're a really good striker. Let's just imagine. And you're 24, and you're Swedish, and you're a really good striker, and you're not playing in the Champions League. You don't have any European football next season. But your talent is such that the game of football itself would be missing out were you not to show us your skills, your movements, your finishing on the highest possible stage. Would it not be incumbent on a club which has, this ability to do such good to take you away from the terrible place you're in and bring you somewhere where your talents can be seen by all and appreciated by all, and you can spread a bit of joy and happiness in the world with your footballing ability?
So you're suggesting it would sort of be a charitable move as much as anything?
Absolutely.
Maybe the Arsenal Foundation could raise the funds.
Hang on, let me get Elliot on the phone here, see how much we can...
Give him a week.
Somehow Elliot's raised £100 million to sign Alexander Isak. I'm being slightly facetious, but I do wonder if, without that European football, Isak and a player of his quality... they want to play in the Champions League. They want to be on TV on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, and not
Thursdays,
just because
apparently sometimes next season.
What? Thursday
Yeah.
Champions?
There are going to be some exclusive Champions League weeks. I don't know how many or when, in which there's Champions League football on Tuesday nights, Wednesday nights, and Thursday nights.
Fuck's sake. Anyway. I was going to say the only reason you're on TV on a Wednesday is because you're in the second round of the fucking Carabao Cup. That's not a good situation for Alexander Isak to be in. And I think Edu and Mikel Arteta, it's incumbent on them to get that guy out of there and to bring him to North London. That's just my 2 cents.
Yeah. The Elliott Smith fundraising page for the Alexander Isak appeal will be launched imminently, I'm sure. Now, I do think there might be something to that, and also on a wider point about Newcastle, when they were taken over, a lot of people were kind of looking at the big clubs and who might be vulnerable, who might be pushed out by Newcastle's arrival at the top table. And a lot of people were saying maybe Arsenal. But I just think it's interesting, we're a few years into this project, and this is a big backward step for them to not be in Europe next season. It affects them in many ways. It affects their revenues, which under the new regulations in turn affects their spending. Leaves them in a position where they might need to sell somebody this summer. It's not been as straightforward for them as we perhaps imagined it would be.
There has been, talk of Bruno Guimaraes as a target for Arsenal, a player that Arsenal like, and there's also reporting about a release clause. I don't know what the release clause is, but I think I saw something around 100 million, which feels very, very expensive to me. But I think if you had 100 million at your disposal and you went to Newcastle, there really is only one player you should put that money down for, and it's not Bruno Guimaraes. I think he's a good player.
Dan Burn.
It is Big Dan Burn, of course. Yeah. Who everyone needs a 6'7" left back.
Yeah. I pay for my footballers by the inch. £100 million.
What is the square footage of Dan Burn?
Yeah, Isak. I mean, listen, Bruno. We've had some signings over the years, particularly recently, where we've kind of had to hold our nose and see how they get on and change our mind about them. But I think Bruno, he would probably be one of the more challenging ones for me to kind of take him to heart swiftly.
I mean,
got to be honest about that.
Maybe he's only looking to join Arsenal so he can elbow Jorginho in the head on a daily basis.
We can't rule that out. Imagine if he signs and then every week it's like, Jorginho's not in the squad. He picks up something in training.
Concussion.
Yeah. We never hear about it. But there are all these photos where Bruno's just sort of staring at him across the training field that come out every week. Yeah, I don't know. I would, first of all, I think 100 million is too much money.
Oh, I agree, yeah.
And to be fair, I don't think anyone really has reported that Arsenal were looking to pay a release clause for Bruno. It's more like if he goes beneath that, I think they would be interested.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, maybe he's kind of the sort of player that if he's your wanker, you sort of love him. But at the moment, he's not our wanker, so he's just a wanker.
Yeah, he's someone else's wanker.
He's someone else's wanker.
Yeah.
And I kind of think I'm okay with that.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
As for Alexander Isak, in a way, he feels like he was always ours. Remember that transfer deadline day with the pictures of was it like a car with the number plate spotted at London Colney? Do you remember that?
Yeah, do you remember there was a cloud in the sky in the shape of an eye, and there was a tree. There was a tree. It looked just like an S.
I think he was spotted at Selfridges, I seem to recall, which is where Arsenal do all their medicals.
That's where they buy their supplies for the medicals.
He was just at Selfridges buying the kit for the photo shoot. So as I say, we've got history with Alexander Isak.
Yeah.
It was that transfer window way back when, a couple of years ago now, when it was between Dusan Vlahovic, Alexander Isak and Dominic Calvert-Lewin. And we ended up signing none of them.
Yeah. And here we are. All these transfer windows later, and it's all going to play out again. Circling back around. It's that's the way it goes. Let's have a quick look at some of the stories that have happened between last week and this week. Albert Sambi Lokonga, he says that he's spoken to Arsenal, and Arsenal have said, it's time to go, buddy. He said, I had a discussion with Arsenal, and the conclusion was the best thing was for me to leave the club. Is that by mutual consent? Albert, we think it's time for you to go. Oh, okay.
It would be good if when he does go, they say Albert Sambi Lokonga has been sold by mutual consent for an undisclosed fee. I actually was quite surprised that he's had that chat that early, because a lot of players who I assume will be leaving the club this summer haven't had that degree of clarity. So fair play to him or his agents or whoever it is, but they've got a pretty straight answer, it seems, out of Edu.
Yeah.
They know the score.
Maybe they're just, they're being efficient, getting their ducks in a row ahead of what could be a complicated transfer window because of the Euros, because of Copa America, because of players being away and, all of those things which can influence deals being done. And we know that there is sort of like a snowball effect as well, isn't there? That when sometimes a deal is in the offing, but you need something else to happen for that deal to go through. So, those things could be held up by the international football. So maybe he's just like, right, I need to know, find out straight away, and then let's get this shit done. Yeah,
probably. He probably wants to get his career moving in the right direction again. I mean, obviously Luton have gone down, so I think it would have been challenging for them, in terms of price and salary potentially anyway. But that option's ruled out. So he's got to find a move somewhere. And I'm curious to see where he ends up. When he did play for Luton, I gather he did pretty well. But he had injury problems, and it wasn't quite the impactful season he would have hoped for.
Yeah.
As for Arsenal, I do think that ship has sailed. And I'm totally fine with that. I think he was absolutely worth a punt. If you think about the pedigree he had, he was playing international football for Belgium. I think he was captaining Anderlecht at the time, playing regularly, winning trophies with them.
Mm-hmm.
It was not a big price. And there is talent there. I think it was a smart enough move, but for various reasons, it just hasn't worked out.
Yeah.
And I think he's obviously at an age where he needs to go and play now as well.
Yeah, for sure. You win some, you lose some. There was a lot of talk about Arsenal looking at a Feyenoord goalkeeper called Justin Bijlo.
Yes, you weren't happy with his injury record, I guess.
It's not a question of being happy with his injury record. It's just it took me about 4 days to read it all. He's broken everything.
I think has its own Wikipedia page.
He's broken everything. He's like broken toe, fucking this, broken wrist, another broken wrist. I mean,
not ideal for a goalkeeper.
No,
actually.
Not ideal. But remember Wojciech Szczesny broke both his arms doing weights.
Yeah. Reinforced steel forearms after that.
That's what he's got now.
That was a secret.
Yeah, I did think the first thing I looked at was what's he like with his feet. And he actually tallies up with David Raya pretty well in that sense.
Yeah, he's good with his feet.
He's good with his feet. It's just that sometimes his feet snap in two. And he has to spend 6 months on the sidelines.
They're liable to fall off, said feet.
How do you find the balance on that, though? How do you find the balance between, okay, this guy, he's going to be a number two. He can play with the ball at his feet. I don't know anything about him as a goalkeeper in terms of, shot stopping or any of that stuff. So I'm not going to pretend. But at least, they're looking at one of the key indicators that we have for our goalkeepers is that they can pass the ball short, medium and long with a relative amount of accuracy. So he ticks those boxes. But, do you...
The thing is, your backup goalie is a guy you need to be able to rely on.
That's kind of where I was going. Like he's not going to play, but you still need him to be available.
Exactly, because who knows when David Raya, I don't know, pulls a hamstring or gets sent off, or anything can happen, right? Bruno Guimaraes tried to behead him in training. Anything could happen.
Using Jorginho's head that he just ripped from his shoulders.
And that's you need your second keeper to be available. Particularly at Arsenal at the moment, at this point in time, we haven't really got a third keeper necessarily for next season even. So I would worry about that. Right. I think it would be encouraging from a stylistic point of view, but the injury record would be a concern. Yeah. It's unusual for a keeper to miss quite as much football as he's missed.
Yes, it is. It is. The other story, which comes from transfer guru and cameo star Fabrizio Romano, he's talking about Thomas Partey. He says Thomas Partey will leave Arsenal this summer. Arsenal want to sell. I assume he wants to go. Maybe it's mutual consent. Who knows? Not much of a surprise, I don't think, even though... he played in all the games in the run-in. I think maybe when they look at those games and they analyze a guy who doesn't look like he can run much anymore, now seems to be the right time with a year left on his contract and get whatever you can in and go a different direction, even if that is someone who's going to bully Jorginho all season long.
Yeah, I must say, by the way, on this, I haven't actually seen the original quote from Fabrizio, and I don't I don't know if he's been taken slightly out of context or if he did say it sounds a bit definitive to say he will leave because things need to happen for that to be the case.
Here's what he said. They have several players lined up. There is a good chance they'll bring in a new midfielder. Thomas will leave. Jorginho has extended.
Well, that does sound quite definitive. But like I say, there has to be an opportunity, a buyer. Maybe Fabrizio knows something I don't. It's entirely possible. I think, the indications are that Thomas could well leave. I'm just cautious because we were saying this a year ago.
Yeah, we were. Yeah.
And, nothing really surfaced in that respect. So we shall see. He's got one more year left on his contract. I think if someone was to make him an offer where it was 3 or 4 years, he would obviously take that at this time, especially given his injury concerns. So we'll have to see what emerges. But, I thought there was a good chance he could go last summer, so I wouldn't be surprised if it happened this summer.
Beyond that, I don't think there's been much going on from an Arsenal perspective.
Not really.
Not in terms of transfers and things.
Just trying to think on social media. There's been a bit of focus on Emil Smith Rowe, a bit of discussion about his future. Aaron Ramsdale turned up at the playoff final dressed as Hagrid, we believe, from Harry Potter.
I mean, was that because he didn't want to be bothered, or was that just him having a laugh with his mates?
So I originally was like, oh, maybe it's because he's a Bournemouth guy and he's in the Southampton end. And he was like, I must be in disguise. But of course, then I reasoned that dressing as an ogre at a football match is probably going to draw more attention to you, if anything.
Do you know who he looked more like? He looked more like fucking Tommy Wiseau from The Room. You are tearing me apart, Aaron.
Maybe that's what it was. I think it's a bit of a tradition between him and his group of mates that the last game of the season, they sort of go and support each other and they go in fancy dress.
Right.
And I think David Brooks, who... Is he on loan at Southampton?
Oh, yeah.
Sure. But he is a very good friend of Aaron Ramsdale. So I think that is the origin of it.
Okay.
He is on loan from Bournemouth. There you go.
Well, there you go. There you go. Well, look, that's about as exciting as it gets. Actually, there's one more thing we should just mention because it's just happened this afternoon. Leo Williamson has signed a new contract at Arsenal, which is fantastic news. Obviously, there's been quite a lot of disappointment. Viviane Miedema coming to the end of her time at the club, and she's been such an influential and quality player. This is a bit of good news the other way.
Yeah, definitely. And, she's had her own struggles with injury, Leah, and, I'm hopeful that we can see the best of her next season and for the foreseeable future.
Right. Let us take a little break here. We will come back with your questions and more in part 2 right after this. Welcome back to the Arsecast Extra. This is part 2 of the show where we answer the questions that you sent to us on Twitter at Gunnerblog and at Arseblog, also on the Arseblog Discord chat server, which you get access to if you are an Arseblog member on Patreon. I've forgotten what I was going to say there. It was profound and interesting in a very, very serious way, and I've completely forgotten what it was. Lost to the mists of time.
Never mind. It might come back, Andy.
It might. People. I was thinking to myself, people will be talking about this thing now forever.
Yeah, you thought the aggregators are going to pick up on this.
Oh, the aggregators will be aggregating the aggregators. Yeah, that's how it goes. Yeah. But
Paulie Drawn was going to animate that bit. But it's gone.
It's gone. It's all gone. So will I ask a question?
I don't know. Will you?
I think I will.
Go on. Okay,
here's a question from, I thought this was quite interesting, from Aman Shelka. Aman Skella on Twitter, who says, do you think prospective signings could be put off by Arteta's lack of rotation? I can imagine young targets would worry after seeing high potential players like Smith Rowe and Vieira have their careers stagnate through lack of minutes.
That's an interesting question. I think... Do I think that? I mean, I think that will sort of... Part of the pitch, I imagine, to any prospective signing will be, you know, we are going to have more games and we intend to have more games by going deeper in the Champions League and being in domestic cups. And therefore, you know, there will be opportunities. I don't think footballers are inclined to kind of worry too much about that. I think that they're generally pretty confident in their abilities. And I think if they get a phone call from Mikel Arteta saying, I want you, I think they're going to feel like, well, I'm probably going to get a chance. It's an interesting point, though. I do think we've spoken about this before, but the backup for Saka thing, I do think that is going to be challenging, you know, because that is a position where it's like Saka plays every week. I think that might be harder than, say, finding a central midfield player where, you know, historically we tend to mix it up a little bit.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're saying there. I think we probably just have to look at what we've got in the squad as the backup for Saka. In that he is going to play most of the games, and if he can't, you've got, let's say, Gabriel Jesus in your squad, hopefully fit and ready, who I know people have been a little hit and miss about, but I think there's no question to my mind anyway, he is a really, really talented player. And even if he was brought in as the number 9, it hasn't quite worked out in that way. If you're looking for someone who can play on the right, he can play on the left, he can play through the middle, like, he's a guy we should be hanging on to, in my opinion. Get his knee fixed, get him fit, get him ready. And I think he could be the guy who could deputise for Saka if we need that, or when we need that next season, rather than going out and sort of saying to somebody, right, we want to buy you, we're going to pay you this much money. But in reality, you're not going to play very much because, well, you're behind Bukayo Saka. It's very, very difficult, right?
From my understanding, it's not often that actually how much you're going to play is a big part of conversations with a player. Like, ultimately, the manager will generally, like, when they're pitching to a player, be it Edu or be it Arteta or be it whoever, they'll say, you know, we like you, we want you for these qualities. You'll compete for a place like everybody else, but I don't think Arsenal are in the business of offering any guarantees. No.
But I mean, presumably a player, you know, if they're a right winger, let's say, or a right-sided forward, and Arsenal come in, that would be surely part of the discussion about, like, well, you know, I'm going to sign here. It's like if we went to buy a right-sided centre-half. Yeah. And they're going to go, well, you know, great, love it, love the idea, Arsenal, brilliant club, going places. I just have this one question, like, you know, the whole Saliba thing. Like, where does that leave me? That would be my question. And I think that would be the question for any player, you know, who was targeted specifically as backup for Bukayo Saka, which is why I don't necessarily think that will be part of what we're doing this summer. I think we might look, like I said, to use someone like Gabriel Jesus in that position next season if we can get him right. But, you know, that idea of, you know, I think it might be a more difficult proposition to convince players if you hadn't just finished, you know, runners up by a couple of points. A team is obviously going in the right direction. There's loads of potential. There's, you know, room to improve and to challenge again next season and to go further in the Champions League despite the new format. I think that will be the thing that attracts players. And they, like you say, will have the confidence to say, well, you know what, I could do better than Emile Smith Rowe. I could do better than Fabio Vieira. And I could give the manager more to think about and therefore get more minutes. I did enjoy the way the Fabio Vieira thing went this week, I have to say, on your article.
Go on.
Well, just from the point of view that you wrote something, you did the player, like who's going to stay, who's going to go, but what does the future hold for each player? Is it certain? Is it uncertain? And there's some uncertainty to Fabio Vieira because of how little he's played. And I think your comment was his performances in training didn't do enough to convince Mikel Arteta to give him minutes. I'm paraphrasing here. You'll know better than I. But then I saw like articles. Fabio Vieira is terrible in training, says The Athletic. McNicholas says Vieira is a bum.
I know.
And the way it goes.
I made the mistake of sort of trying to sort of... I replied to one of the aggregators being like, here's what I actually said in full context. And then I thought, I can't possibly chase all this down. They will do what they want. I think my resolution this summer is to kind of try and ignore the aggregators as far as possible. But yeah, you're right. I think I said that his performances in training hadn't been enough to maintain his spot in the hierarchy. Mm-hmm. And that is completely borne out by how little football he's played. It is actually quite extraordinary how infrequently he's been used. I know he was obviously had a big injury and then came back in February, but he's barely had a kick since then. And given, the regard in which Arteta held him last season and the way in which he spoke about him, that's been pretty striking.
Like he did, it was clear that he was prepared to give Vieira chances. Yeah. Up until, the second half of this season. Like Vieira started some games last season, had a Granit Xhaka, if I remember. There were one or two games where he started, and there were games, where he was given the opportunity and didn't really produce. I mean, I think there is a talented player in there. Technically, he's good. There's clearly talent there. But when a player doesn't get a look in, you're always, with Mikel Arteta, a little sort of, right, what's going on? What's going on here? Is there something, bubbling under the surface that we're not aware of? But I think what we also know is that if you do work hard, and if the manager thinks you're working hard, then you will get your opportunities. So
yeah, I mean, he's been an unused sub in 14 of the last 17 games, right? So
right.
He's been available, and he's not been getting on the pitch. I think he's probably been caught in a bit of a negative spiral, to use an AVBism. He's been injured. He's not had rhythm. Then he's found himself out of favour. Maybe that's affected his confidence level. I think the Vieira we have right now is some way away from the best version of Fabio Vieira. How that resolves, I don't know. Maybe they can bring him back in pre-season, get him really fit, get him really sharp, integrate him. But I do think that's one where if there was interest, then maybe you would consider letting them go. I mean, the problem is we paid a lot of money for him, right?
Yeah.
30, I think it rising to 35, something like that. His value is obviously way lower than that, I would suggest, at this particular moment in time. So you almost feel a bit like you need to rehabilitate the player a little bit before you sell them, even if it's a loan potentially. I don't know.
Let me just continue then, if you don't mind me asking a couple, because we had a question just along those lines from JDH, who's at JDH_14, who says, afternoon, regarding the likes of Ramsdale and Smith Rowe, should we consider loaning rather than selling them? Their values are currently low and game time could increase this or show they have a future with us. And there was another one similar to this, it's in the ballpark of Vieira. On the Discord, Arse Baby says, everyone's making their argument for the most important transfer position. Surely it's a creative midfielder, because we're completely reliant on Odegaard, and if he gets injured, our entire attack and title chase will grind to a halt. Your thoughts? And I suppose there was a school of thought that Vieira was in some way like an analogue for Odegaard, as and when he wasn't going to be available.
Yeah. I think there are some prominent Twitter users who have been sort of pushing the idea of playing Fabio Vieira over Martin Odegaard at times during their time together in the club. But there you go. It's a really interesting one. I agree that is a area of need. I think Odegaard is probably the most irreplaceable player in the squad at this point in time. I don't think we have anyone who can offer quite what he does. And he does a bit of everything, let's be honest. He works super hard, he scores goals, he makes chances. He's a leader.
No one makes more chances.
Exactly. And I think, Smith Rowe and Vieira probably would have been the players Arteta would have been hoping to kind of take on that mantle this season. And it hasn't happened for them. And to be honest, they've not had a ton of opportunities either. Like, it's partly on them, but they also haven't really had an opportunity to gain rhythm. It's a part that's been availability in Vieira's case.
But I mean, do the circumstances of the season also play into that as well, in that the stakes are so high that even if you wanted to maybe rotate a little bit and you were confident in a player's ability to do that, when they haven't played and they don't have the rhythm, as you say, it becomes more difficult. So the default is to stick with, the guy who's doing it week in, week out, which, is an obvious pick, but we've talked about the need maybe to expand the sort of inner circle of Arteta's trust just a little bit.
I think as well, like when we get to the end of the season and we finish as strongly as we did, I think it's tempting to look back and be like, well, we were just great this season. We were just brilliant. But, last summer we lost Granit Xhaka, and shout out to him, by the way, scored a screamer in the German Cup final to complete the double.
What a goal that was.
Yeah.
What a goal.
But I think in the first half of the season, we struggled a little bit to find continuity and structure and fluidity in midfield. And when we hit upon a balance that worked, we leaned into it and we stuck with it. And so I think there was maybe a little bit of a reluctance to kind of mix it up again. I'm fascinated to see what happens with those two players, Vieira and Smith Rowe. I find it hard to imagine they both go, just because I feel like in terms of numbers, I think it would leave us with a lot to do. As for signing like an attacking midfield player, I would love us to do that. From what I hear, it's quite a difficult market. Like, there aren't a ton of options. It's interesting. One of the biggest options on the market, who was expected to go to Man City this summer, was Paqueta, of course, of West Ham.
Oof.
Which might have started the ball rolling, in terms of the market for that position. Well, I think we can safely say that's probably not going to happen anymore. No. So,
although he probably should go there, given City's ability to kick the can down the road when it comes to charges of wrongdoing. 15 years later, Paqueta will...
That's true, actually. They could probably get him to retirement without having to face justice. Yeah. So it might be wise from his perspective. So, really, I'm really interested in this position. And as for sort of... There was oh, sorry, that's my alarm. What's that saying? Oh, I know what that is. Don't worry. There was a question about loans. So... In the case of Smith Rowe, I think probably not. I think he's got 2 years left at this point in time. And I think this is the summer to sell Emil Smith Rowe. I know it might feel like his value is not what it was, but I really feel like it's time. And I don't get the sense he'd be hugely enthused about the idea of going on loan. I think if he's going to leave Arsenal, the club of his life, I think he wants it to go somewhere where he wants to be, like, and have a sort of security in that. So I don't quite see that. I think the Ramsdale one maybe, because you've got a player there that Arsenal, I think the fee will have risen ultimately to something close to 30 million to Sheffield United, and I think you'd struggle to get that this summer. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think someone's paying that for Ramsdale at this point in time, because they know that he's our number two, and I think his value has dropped accordingly.
Yes, I think that's true. Yeah, you could easily make the case for a Ramsdale loan, not so much for Smith Rowe for me. And
he's got another year on his contract. I think it's 2027 Ramsdale at the least. They might even have an option beyond that. I think you've got the security there to say, go out. If he's a keeper, unless he catches, whatever this Feyenoord keeper's got, he's going to play a lot of games. And if he plays them to anything like his best level, I think he's going to go up in value from where he is right now. So I actually don't hate that idea. I know a lot of fans are like, we should be getting money for players at last. But I think that's one case where it's like, what would you get this summer? And I think you could be better served by playing a longer game.
Yeah. What do you think of the contention, such as it is, that maybe Ethan Nwaneri could step up into the first team squad and start to integrate and be an option for one of those midfield positions?
I think that's plausible. I gather that he's done really well in training over the last few months. I know we've not really seen him with the first team since that little cameo he made against West Ham. But I hear that Mikel Arteta is really happy with him, and there's quite a lot of excitement about his potential. So I think he stands a very good chance of being integrated into the squad next season. And we've spoken about how many games there will be. You'd have to think, if you're someone like him, the domestic cups could really present a good opportunity. Yeah. And who knows, maybe more. And this is not information, this is just my gut feeling. I don't think they'll send him out on loan. I think he's the sort of talent that you want to keep close to home. For sure. Do you think he might be involved? I think so. If the talent is there, clearly. And I think the sooner you get potentially he could be a first team player, which means he's a bit of a special talent at that level, at the age he is, only just 17. I think the sooner you can integrate that kind of talent into the first team squad, the better. I know someone like Jack Wilshere spent, was it like half a season on loan at Bolton? But I think with Nwaneri, they'll want to get him integrated as quickly as possible, and he could well be, a cup game guy, maybe a Champions League game here and there. But he can play, number 8. He can play off the right. Yeah. Maybe he's an option for the Saka backup if and when he can't play. And you've got, like I said, you've got Jesus, you've got Martinelli, who played there on the last day of the season as well. You could put Trossard there at a push if you wanted to. So there are loads of options, but he would certainly be somebody I'd be interested to see in certain fixtures in that Saka position, in that right-hand attacking position as well. Well, it could be a big summer for him because we know the squad's going to be a bit depleted when they go on tour. And I would venture he's got a very good chance of being with that first team group that goes to America. James, I'm sorry to interrupt you here. Go on. I just opened up my Twitter and I see... I'm worried now. I just saw a tweet which says, YouTuber Speed is hospitalised in the Gloucestershire cheese rolling race after tumbling uncontrollably down a steep hill days after crashing Man United's FA Cup winners party. No way. Hospitalised in the cheese rolling. I don't know what that means, but... Have you ever seen the cheese rolling before? I have seen it. It is... It's one of the greatest athletic events in the world. I love all my English friends, but you have some peculiar quirks and foibles when it comes to sort of village-based sporting events. Yeah, as far as I know, they chuck a cheese down a hill and people chase it, essentially. You essentially fall down a hill in pursuit of a cheese. A wheel of cheese. And I think people are injured every year, quite substantially. I mean, if you give it a look on YouTube... It's quite... They throw themselves down a hillside. It's like the Pamplona of wherever Gloucestershire is. I don't know where Gloucestershire is. The running of the cheese. And listen, that's the good news that Speed had a crack at that, and hopefully he hasn't cracked anything too significant. All right. Well, look, we were talking about Nwaneri and about how America, the US could be a very interesting opportunity for him and for a couple of other young players who are going to have to fill the gap when a lot of the senior players probably are not going to be there. Yeah, I think Lewis Skelly is probably likely to be on that trip as well. one or two others will be called up. I think that could be a time, and those tours can be pivotal in terms of determining, a player's future and a player's role. So let's see. I'm excited about.
That's true, actually, because I was looking back at something I did on Patreon in 2019, and I did sort of like a journal, a diary of the tour, which is probably what I'm going to do again this time around for our Patreon members. But I was looking at something that I wrote about Bukayo Saka. Let's see if I can find it here. Where is it? I can't find it, but it was like, whoa, Saka is really, really good. And he sort of came to prominence on this tour, but you could see that even though he was only 17, he was, very much ready to be part of the first team squad. Oh, here it is. A word for Bukayo Saka, who at 17 years of age looks to have some frightening potential. Give this lad some Europa League minutes, I said. He's so positive and strong and determined. So he took those opportunities. You can make your mark in pre-season, and it might just give the coach or the manager that little bit of a bump in belief and faith in your ability to do it. In competitive games.
Many times, if maybe there's a transfer target, but the deal's not progressing, or maybe the market's not as fluid as we'd think, and then a guy from the academy gets a chance in pre-season and impresses, and the club get behind them. It can happen very, very quickly. So I don't want to put too much expectation on some of these young players' shoulders, but I'm excited to see. That will be one of the kind of bonuses that comes out of the fact that we might not have the strongest squad in the US, is that we will get to see some of these guys in a first team setting. I'm sure they're excited too. They must realize it as well. So we'll see what happens. Okay, your question. Okay, what about this? David Baratunk says, we seem to value Premier League experience a lot. So could you give me, beyond Elise, he knows what you're going to say, some other Premier League players you feel could make a difference here? And then he says, I'm not even kidding when I think that Arteta could turn someone who is a dedicated professional with a limited but well-defined skill set like McTominay into a useful player for us. Sorry, I was just paralysed with fear at the idea of Scott McTominay in an Arsenal shirt. Yeah, like I know the point he's making, but no, I think David knows that that's a controversial statement. I suspect he does. I mean, look, it's such a difficult question because you could go around lots of teams and say, well, yeah, under Arteta's tutelage, with his coaching, once they come to understand the structure and where they fit in it and what's expected of them in it, that a lot of players could come in and do a job. So I can't really go through a bunch of names in that sense. But, I think the point is about, maybe it's related to someone like Kai Havertz, where he came in and everyone was like, not sure about this. And by the end of the season, I'm not going to say he's proven everyone wrong or anything like that. I think that's the wrong way to put it. What we've seen is how a player in the right environment with the right teammates can flourish, if you like, if that's the right word. So there are just loads of players, I think, who could come in. But the difficulty is, the closer you get to being a title-winning side, I do think that pool of players is much smaller, particularly when you might be looking for players who are difference makers, who might be able to sort of elevate you to an extent. So I don't know. I mean, let me throw this back at you then, because there was a lot of stories about one particular Premier League player, and I don't know how true it is, but Sebi on the Discord says, would you take Rashford if he was available, and where do you think he would fit in? Well, that would kind of be a bit of a Havertzy deal, wouldn't it? Magnus Holmberg said, do you see any other potential Kai cases in the Premier League, i.e. players that used to be excellent but have been mismanaged at their current club? And my answer to that would have been Rashford, I think, in terms of a guy who's got clearly enormous talent but seems to have lost his way a little bit. And I don't think it's sort of telling tales out of school or being unfair necessarily to say that. I think he's lost his way kind of on and off the pitch a little bit. He doesn't seem particularly happy at United at present. And I think a change would be really good for him. Sort of speaking as an admirer of his ability, and I guess maybe as an England fan, obviously he was left out of the England squad for the Euros. I think he should move. I think it would be good for him to kind of get out of Manchester and the sort of pressure cooker environment and everything that exists around being a kind of homegrown player at that club at this particular point in time. And I would welcome him at Arsenal. I really would. I think he's got a lot of attributes that would suit us. I just think it would be incredibly expensive to sign him and to pay him. And
he's on huge money, isn't he?
He's on huge money. And, I mean, Kai's on pretty decent money himself, but I would have slight reservations there. But I do like the player, and I think, he can play wide, he can play centre forward. I think he's much better wide, to be honest, than he is through the middle. Mm-hmm. He could play on the left for us potentially. I think it'd be quite exciting. But yeah, I don't see it happening. But I don't mind it at all. Yeah. What do you think?
Look, I had a quick look at his stats. I think in 3 of the last 5 seasons, he's got over 20 goals in all competitions, double figures in assists as well. Had a couple of seasons in there where he didn't score too many. Last season was one, and the season before last, maybe he only got 5 or 6 goals. I mean, I can see there's a talented player in there. Some of the goals he scores are extraordinary. I just wonder, when you look at some of the performances this season, the sort of flaws in his game, which are to do with maybe his defensive work, his awareness, like how many videos, I don't know, how many of these were taken out of context or whatever, but there were some videos where it didn't look great for him, the way he was ambling around the pitch. And I suspect, unless there was a very serious conversation had about that aspect of things, for all the talent, he wouldn't fit. Because if he did that for Mikel Arteta, he wouldn't be playing. So
yeah, and it's
I don't know how much that's just related to. You can say, well, you've got to be professional. You've got to do your work. At the very least, you should do the basics, which are, chasing back and running and being aware and being defensive. But at the same time, if you're not happy at a club, if you're not happy with what the club is at this moment in time, if there are things off the field that are impacting your performances on it, the human element, I guess you would say, if that's what fed into this, it's easy to isolate one moment in a game of football and say, well, this guy is completely lazy. He doesn't give a shit. I mean, I don't think it's, it seems ludicrous to me to say that Marcus Rashford, who grew up at Manchester United, who is a Manchester United fan, doesn't give a shit about Manchester United. That just doesn't make sense to me. But you can understand why fans might be a little aggrieved if a player isn't doing the work and putting the effort in.
Totally. I mean, he'll be 27 in October. I wonder if he's just beyond the kind of age window where Arsenal would justify spending big money on him. Declan Rice was 24, Kai Havertz was 24. We were buying them for that 3 years, really, that Rashford's just had. I do wonder if kind of the ship may have sailed on this one slightly.
He feels a bit, I don't want to upset him or anyone, close to him, but he feels a bit Spurs, maybe.
Oh, wow. Maybe. I could see that. I think there's a chance Jack Grealish ends up at Spurs this summer.
That is, Jack Grealish and James Maddison, the Spursiest duo of all time.
Yeah. I think that feels about right. In terms of other Premier League players, I mean, at the live pod, we were asked this question, and I said Eze.
Yeah.
Yes, I do really like him, and he is showing, I think, how talented he is under this new manager at Palace. I think there's a decent chance he'll go to City now that Paqueta's off the market, but we shall see. And there's another player in the Premier League. I have to say that every time I watch him, he does get me off my seat. I think he's incredibly exciting. And that is Morgan Gibbs-White of Nottingham Forest.
Just going to mention him. Yeah, I think there's something to him for sure.
He's got a real swagger in the way he plays. I don't know anything about him. I don't know if he, does he have the defensive side of his game? Is his character the kind
he likes to tackle? He likes to tackle. He's a spiky little guy as well. Do you remember the game could have been against Manchester United? And he went in on one tackle, got up, went straight in on another. Could have been Johnny Evans. He's got a bit of cuntery to him, which could be. And he's 24. Eze's 25. I feel like they sort of fit the mould a little bit better at this point in time. And Gibbs-White is one of those players where he's kind of a star in a team lower down the league. A bit of a Grealish in that way. And you sort of wonder, could he adjust? Could he acclimatise to being, playing maybe a less prominent role in a bigger team? I don't know, but I do know that he's massively talented. So I'm curious to find out. Yeah, Forest, of course, may need to sell pretty quickly this summer as well, if some of the stories are to be believed about their financial situation. So perhaps one to keep an eye on. Again, this is not based on any inside info. This is us just throwing stuff around. It will be
all over Twitter by the end of the day.
Yeah,
that's like Morgan Gibbs-White. He's a sort of guilty pleasure of mine. I do really enjoy watching him, and we'll see. I mean, sod's law, he'll go to Spurs as well.
All right. Hall Mike 88 says, of all the players coming back from loan, if you had to pick one to reincorporate into the fold, who would it be? I'm not saying I think any of them will get worked in, but it seems like a fun debate if you had to pick one.
Yeah. So I guess that's Arthur Okonkwo, who's out of contract, so I think he's going to go. Then you've got Tierney, Tavares, Lokonga, and Marquinhos. I feel like it's a loaded question. I feel like there's only really one answer here, and it's probably Kieran Tierney. But I'm not even convinced by that. A few people have asked me this week, can you see Tierney being reintegrated? And the honest answer is no. I don't think so. I think he'll want to go. I don't know. Do you have a different answer? I don't have a great sense of how Marquinhos is doing.
Here's my advice. Forget about Marquinhos. Just forget about Marquinhos. Don't worry about it. Don't stress. I know you lie awake at night worrying.
I honestly, I can't sleep.
How is Marquinhos? How's he doing out there? Just don't worry about it.
Let that one go.
Lokonga, we know, is going. Tavares, no. he is slightly fun and chaotic.
He's great fun.
In small doses, but I think we know fun and chaotic is not. They're not on the buzzword bingo of Mikel Arteta, are they?
Perhaps not.
So that really only leaves Tierney. It leaves, maybe if you want to go a bit further down, Charlie Patino, Brooke Norton-Cuffy, Micah Beereth, potentially, as someone who could come in.
That would be quite an interesting one, wouldn't it? He's had a very good season. Won the league, I think, in Austria. Is that right?
They won the league. I think they won the cup as well. So.
Yeah. The Tierney one, comes about because of us potentially needing a left back, and he's very much a left back. But I feel like,
he's yesterday's left back.
Kind of. Yeah. It'd be like sort of getting back with an ex kind of thing, whereas we probably need to move on. And he needs to move on too.
He does. And his season at Real Sociedad was hit by injury, and I think that really is the underlying issue with Kieran Tierney, is the consistency of the injuries leads to inconsistency in performances. So Yeah. So the answer, I think, is none of them.
I think I agree. I can't find a reality in my mind where one of them is properly part of things.
Yeah, I mean, you keep Tierney and he could do a job if you needed him, but, it wouldn't be ideal for club or player, I think.
Yeah, and listen, I think Tierney, I think there's a pretty good relationship between Tierney and the club. I think there's every chance that, he joins up with training and he's, part of the group and, I'm sure they'll be happy to have him around for as long as he's there. But I think if a buyer comes in, he'll want to take that opportunity, and I think Arsenal will be prepared to as well.
Yeah.
I don't see that working out.
Celtic have Champions League money, of course, so who knows?
Wow, yeah. It does kind of feel like a bit of a matter of time until he eventually goes back to Celtic.
Agree.
But the problem is his wages. I mean, in all seriousness, he just earns way too much money for Celtic to pay him at this point in time.
They just need Elliot McSmith to do a little bit of for the Celtic Foundation.
Here's a question from PJ, who says, nobody could have seen Ramsdale being replaced after 22-23, but it happened. Can you foresee the same happening to Ben White with Timber? It seems crazy, but Arteta will clearly be ruthless for small upgrades towards his preferred style of play. Timber can clearly play left back, but I think it's clear that's more a patch-up job rather than the ideal/preferred situation.
Well, look, I've said that myself, that I don't really think he is the plan for left back. I think he can play there. I won't be surprised to see him there at all, but I don't think he is going to be the long-term guy there. Is it possible with Mikel Arteta? Absolutely. Absolutely. It is possible that Timber could come in and play so well and Ben White doesn't play as much, and then Ben White isn't really playing at all because Timber's fit it's not impossible. I just think that what Ben White has done this season, playing through injury and making himself available when he had, knee problems and things like that, is something that Mikel Arteta won't take lightly, and it will stand him in good stead with the manager. It's going to be very interesting. It's hard to see how it's going to be like a 50-50 job share type thing with the two of them. But I don't see Ben White being as ruthlessly discarded as Aaron Ramsdale, for example.
No, I don't see that either. And look, I've got nothing but good things to say about Ben White. But I do think it's an interesting question.
Yeah.
I think last summer, I seem to remember, maybe we were talking about it, I seem to remember saying that I felt that by the end of the season, Timber would be, the kind of first choice right back. And I still think there's at least a possibility of
Yeah, of course. It's possible, yeah.
Yeah, we bought him, they love him and they love a lot of what he brings. But yeah, who knows? I'm actually really interested to see how the centre-back situation plays out, because obviously Saliba and Gabriel are the first choice, and I don't think anyone disputes that. But we kind of never really got into what we would do if we were without one of them. Because they played all the games.
Yeah, they did. I mean, I think, the solutions are there. When you look at the squad, the solutions are there. You've got Tomiyasu who can play right centre-back, left centre-back. If you've got Timber fit, Ben White can play right centre-back. Kiwior can play left centre-back. So I don't think it's a question.
Centre-back for Ajax as well.
Yeah, exactly. So there's no shortage of options. And I do think that's kind of how it will go next season, where we might see, let's say, for certain games, it isn't Saliba at right centre-back. It's Ben White at right centre-back with Timber outside him, or the other way around.
Yeah.
Because we are going to have to rotate. As we said at the start, we need the sort of circle of trust or trusted players to expand. And I think if you put Timber in that mix, he's absolutely somebody who would be in that. So whether he plays left back, whether he plays centre half, whether he plays right back, I think his availability allows you to shuffle your squad, if that's the right way of putting it, and keep people a bit more fresh and maybe not. Like, we've needed Ben White so badly this season because we didn't have another right back. Not that was at the level that we needed, right?
Sure, we had a Portuguese guy.
Yeah, I mean, he's gone, and good luck to Cedric, and wherever he ends up, I hope he has a very nice time and plays some football. But in the context of our season and where we were going and what we wanted to do, he wasn't the guy. So Ben White has had to really be available, and I think probably if there was another option, he might have sat down for a while, or he might have been rested, or they would have managed his minutes differently. So I don't think it's going to be a case that Timber's arrival just pushes Ben White out. I think Timber's arrival will give the defence or our defensive lineups a lot more variety.
Yeah. I mean, I think it was the final game of the season where Tomiyasu switched in to play as left-sided centre-half during the second half. And we've actually seen that very infrequently in his time at Arsenal. Even though that's his position for Japan, I think you could probably count on one hand the amount of times he's filled in at centre-back since signing for Arsenal. Kiwior has played the majority of his football as a left-back. White and Timber we consider primarily as fullbacks. But I think we might see all of those players get more minutes at centre-half next season.
Yeah.
And who knows, maybe there's another stage of the tactical evolution to come. We saw when Timber played on the final day, he was taking up, one of the lanes in attack almost at times. Or maybe Ben White will play centre-back and step into midfield a la John Stones. I think all these things are on the table. Yeah. But yeah, I certainly think that what happens with the defenders is going to be really interesting because you've got a really good group of players who are very versatile. So it's actually quite hard to predict how it might play out.
All right, let's do one just to finish here. It's a quick one. It comes from Call Me Joey 419. All right, Joey 419. He says, what is the most you think we'll spend on a single player this summer? A, less than 50 million. B, 50 to 75 million. C, 75 million to 100 million. D, 100 million plus.
I'm going to say B, 50 to 75. I think we might see... I mean, I know that still sounds like a vast amount of money, but that is kind of... ludicrously, that is kind of the going rate for a Champions League quality player, I think, in this market. So I wouldn't be surprised if we saw, a couple of those rather than one sort of big £100 million plus player. What do you think?
I'm sort of inclined to agree with you, but for the sake of variety, I'll just go with C. There might be somebody who sneaks a little bit over the 75 million, all in with clauses and everything else.
Isak, I guess.
Well, yeah, that's it.
Depends how much Elliot can raise, doesn't it?
99.999 million on Alexander Isak. Yeah, you'd love to see it. So we'll see.
That'd be great.
All right. Well, look, we're going to leave it there. We will continue the Arsecast Extra schedule as normal for you throughout the summer. Might not always be in the morning, but we'll do our best as we always do. You can join us on Patreon tomorrow. We're going to do something for our wonderful Patreon members. We're going to do a player ratings podcast looking back on the season. So feel free to join us for that. It's patreon.com/Arseblog. And we'll have an Arsecast for you a bit later in the week as well. So for now, take it easy, folks, and we will catch you on the next one.
Bye-bye.